Okay, this video is meant to address the problem of what they call deskilling. And the context here is we're thinking about the ways that algorithms are involved in our lives and our society and the way they're changing and reshaping it. And specifically in this series, we're thinking about the ways that algorithms collaborate with us. So we'll use our familiar 6-question framework to explore the problem of deskilling. And I want to start out, there's another video in this playlist about displacement that has this same exact slide. We're going to start from the same place but move into a very different place. So we're thinking about the areas where algorithms collaborate with us. And so they collaborate with us in our work tasks, and you can subdivide that into physical and intellectual, warfare, governance, and just our everyday kinds of tasks. All right, so inevitably, not for all of these tasks, but inevitably for some of them, algorithms are going to be so good at collaborating with us that eventually they just don't need us. Okay, so is that a good thing or a bad thing or neither good or bad? So I'm saying it depends on a couple of things. So first of all, workers have to have the opportunity to replace their income. So that was the problem of displacement, and that's in another video. Okay, so it depends on another thing too, and that is the present problem. That's what we're examining now, the problem of deskilling. So could algorithms take tasks from us that are actually good for us to do? And that is independent of whether we like to do them. We might be glad to get rid of those tasks, but maybe they're good for us to do. Okay, so first of all, I want to say look, we're stuck with the word deskilling. It's the word that's used by a lot of people, and fortunately or unfortunately, I don't get to be in charge of deciding which word is being used. So I am talking about deskilling, but I don't like the word because it makes us think that what we're talking about are skills. And we are talking about skills, but we're talking about things that are much broader than just skills. So if I were choosing, I would, instead of talking about skills, I would talk about an actualization. So let's think about that word. It's not a word we use a lot, but it is the word that's in the self-actualization, the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you've probably heard about. So, this hierarchy is meant to explain human behavior, why human beings are doing what they're doing, why they say, I need this and I want this. So I think it's fair to characterize the general idea as this. So there's this pyramid here, and the pyramid was not actually designed by Maslow. Someone else kind of put this in, did the infographic. But if you think about a pyramid, so the lower the needs are on the pyramid, it's not that we can't pursue needs from different categories at the same time. For example, we could be seeking shelter but also seeking friendship. But it's just that if we're deficient in a need, if we have an unmet need from the lower that unmet need is on the pyramid, that need tends to be the dominant one. Okay, so if you don't have a reliable place to sleep, there are other needs that you're going to be pursuing in life, but the need to find somewhere reliable to sleep is probably going to be the dominant need. Okay. All right, and then we got the top of the pyramid. We've got the self-actualization thing. So what is it? Well, let's think about actualization, in terms of its conceptual opposite, which is potential. So we have something that's potential and actual, and you know they're conceptual opposites because you have to use the word to define the other one. So when something's actual, that just means that it has fulfilled or realized its potential. So if it's potential, that means that it's not the actual has not been realized. So the human brain, for example, has a lot of potential, and in fact, think about. You've heard the term liberal arts education. So what kind of education is that? Well, that's meant to distinguish between kinds of educations that are preparing you for a certain job or career. Those are obviously important, but liberal arts isn't about teaching you something specific that you can then use in a practical sense. Um, the idea of is like liberating yourself from your potential. Your brain is stuck with all this potential to think and explore the world and to engage in critical thinking, but it's in some sense locked in there. So the idea of a liberal arts education, it's like, how do we unleash all that potential? Right? We want to teach people critical thinking skills, not teaching them what to think, which is what you would learn, in a trade school, or like as you're training for like getting specific knowledge for a specific job. It's not about what to think; it's about how to think. Um, so the idea of potential versus actual is used there. Okay, so more on the what's familiar about the problem, which shouldn't be a surprise because, like when we're talking about displacement, for example, that's easy to understand what the problem is. Here we have the opposite issue where it takes a while to understand what the problem actually is. So technology takes away loads from us. Oftentimes those are physical loads. Sometimes those are cognitive loads. And so now, because of this technology, we can achieve the same goal or a similar goal or a substitute goal in a way where there's less friction, there's less difficulty. It's much easier to attain that. So the first thing you think is, boy, aren't I fortunate? It's nice. I'm happy that my load's been reduced. I can achieve this goal in an easier way. The question is that always actually good for us? So the point is that algorithms, by meeting real wants and needs that we actually have, we are demanding the algorithms, do this job. We are happy to have them do the job. It's still, the algorithm could do the job in a way that leaves us unactualized. And I know that that's kind of abstract, so I've got some examples here. So the first one is more about, this is kind of like de-skilling. The other two examples, the nuclear bombs and then the one I'm going to give in just a moment about democracy, those demonstrate why I think this is much bigger than de-skilling. This is about human actualization rather than just a set of skills. Okay, but let's start out with something simple. Let's talk about the calculator. The calculator, I'm coming out as pro-calculator here. Officially, I like calculators. I have some, and I plan to keep having them and keep using them. So it's not controversial, if calculators are good. Of course they are. But the question is, could we over-rely on them? And would that be bad for us? Okay, well, so what does a calculator take away if we're like using it as a crutch, if we're relying on it too much? Well, it takes away the need for us to do mental math. So we don't have to add and subtract and divide and multiply in our head anymore if we have this calculator around to do that for us. Okay, so you might think, okay, my cognitive load has been reduced. Thank you, calculator. I'm fortunate that calculators are around, that I don't have to do this thinking. But what if you're not fortunate? What if you're the opposite of fortunate? Okay, so in mental math, you can go look at some YouTube videos about the advantages of mental math. There's some really surprising advantages to mental math that most people think that having to do math in your head has. And some of them are surprising. They're not obviously connected to math. They're things like strategic thinking, like reducing dementia. These are things that a lot of researchers think that doing mental math actually helps us avoid dementia, helps us with our strategic planning, but that's not obvious. And so removing the burden of having to do math in our heads using this calculator isn't actually good for us. Okay, so that's a bit about de-skilling. That's a kind of a good de-skilling example. But let me give you two more examples now that really illustrate why I don't think skill is the right word. We're talking about human actualization. Okay, so let's think about mass bombs, nuclear bombs, for example. So, what's bad about nuclear bombs, about that technology, right? I'm not going to get into an ethical debate about whether nukes should exist, but there is a thought experiment that's not real, but it's just been proposed to make us think about what's missing from our human experience when we have nuclear technology available to us. Um, the thought experiment goes like this: what if, so there are nuclear weapons out there. For example, the president of the U.S. has access to them, has nuclear codes, can activate those nuclear weapons. I mean, there's some steps to go through. Who knows what those steps are? But what if the nuclear codes were in somebody's body? So some dude was, going around, with the president. But if the president wanted to use the nuclear weapons, the president would have to kill this person with his bare hands and then reach inside his body cavity and pull out the nuclear codes. Sorry, it's super gross. I know it's super gross. But the thought experiment is fascinating because what it's saying is, look, one thing that we should be afraid of with technologies like nuclear bombs is that they've removed faces from the equation. And I think faces, that sounds like a small thing. Not a small thing at all, right? So faces are actually importantly connected to human empathy. When we're not seeing someone's face, it's easier to get mad at them. It's easier to have online comments about, oh, this person is blah 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 and blah blah blah. But seeing their face actually changes pretty dramatically how you think about how you treat other people. Okay, so wartime, you used to have to look someone in the face and kill them, and that was the whole thing. But there are these technologies now that allow you to skip over that step. Right now, you can kill a bunch of people and never look at their faces. Right? They're just little dots on the screen or something like that. So in this thought experiment, we're restoring the empathy back to it because in order to get the nuclear codes, the president would actually have to kill in a dramatic way this person. And if they're not willing to do that, maybe they shouldn't be firing nuclear weapons either, right? That's the idea. So the thought experiment puts back in what the technology has removed. I'm going to give you another example. Again, this is showing that this is much broader than a skill. This is one of my favorite examples from Aristotle. So Aristotle, philosopher, a few thousand years ago. Aristotle had some nice things to say about a democracy. He talked about everything, but politics is one of them. So he had some nice things to say about democracy. Why? Was it because in a democracy, we're more likely to arrive at a good decision? That's not his reason. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true. A lot of people, maybe Aristotle, me, would think that in a democracy as opposed to other forms of government, a tyranny or an oligarchy, a monarchy or something like that, where just a few, or an aristocracy, there's just a few people, wealthy people, skilled people, one person is just in charge. I think a democracy makes it more likely that we come up with a good decision. A democracy is just built from the words demos, which is a Greek word for people, and kratic, which means power. Right? So in a democracy, the people are in power. I think we have a better shot at getting important answers right when there's democracies rather than dictatorships. Did Aristotle favor democracies because in a democracy there's less possibility for corruption? That's not his reason either. Now, I'm not saying, for all I know, Aristotle did think there's less possibility for corruption. Most people think there's less possibility for corruption in a democracy. I think that, right? So when you have lots of checks and balances and the people actually have votes and stuff, it's much harder for corruption to happen versus when there's just one person who's in charge of society. Corruption is very easy. But that's not his reason either. His reason is because he calls humans, he says that they're political animals. And he doesn't mean Democrats versus Republicans. By political, he means people that belong in a society together with each other. We humans belong there. We don't belong on desert islands by ourselves. You can live on a desert island by yourself if you want to, but in doing so, you're not really being fully human, right? Birds, belong in nests. Bees belong in hives. Humans belong in a society with other humans. Okay, so there's a naturalness to it. It's actually good for us to have to, for example, let's take healthcare. Healthcare it's very difficult to decide how best to distribute healthcare. It's a complicated issue. There's lots of models out there, and sometimes even when you have a model that you like, it's very difficult to execute. So Aristotle would say it's a good thing that people have to vote on something like how to distribute healthcare, because we have to think about it. We have to think about our reasons. We have to be willing to talk to each other, to persuade each other, and just figure out like the best way to organize society in a way that's fair and just to everybody. Okay, let's imagine a dictator. So the dictator doesn't have to worry about what the people think. But let's imagine that this dictator is a very ethical person, a benevolent dictator, and also a very wise person. So this dictator considers the issue of healthcare and makes these really intelligent decisions about the most efficient ways to and fair ways to get everybody healthcare, and everybody's happy with the result. Is that good? Well, of course it's good if we have a good result and a fair distribution of healthcare. But what Aristotle would say is that is bad for us in a democracy, because one of the nice things about democracy is it forces us to have to think about this complicated issue and about fairness and about justice and about how healthcare can work out for everybody. So when a dictator just says, here's the answer, that deprives us of the opportunity to go through the process with each other. Now, you can just take out a dictator and put in an algorithm, right? What if an algorithm is in charge of things, and the algorithm says, beep, boop, here's how healthcare should be, and here's how it's efficient, and here's how everybody can get it. Would that be a good thing? Well, if the algorithm got it right, of course, that's a good thing. But there's also something lost, something important lost. It's not just a skill, it's a human actualization, our opportunity to think through how to organize society in a fair way that helps everybody. All right, let's think about what's new here because of the scale of digital technology. Well, what we know about AI is it always speeds things up. Almost inevitably, that's always the pace. It goes faster, faster, faster. But tasks, and here I'll focus on the list of three things, like critical thinking tasks, tasks that involve empathy, essentially, tasks that involve creativity. Those and other ones like that, I'm just using those for this presentation, but you can come up with a longer list if you sit and think about it. But tasks like those do not work according to the logic of efficiency. They work slowly, and they have to work slowly. Like, creativity isn't something that it's good if you can just like go fast forward, right? Creativity actually unfolds in time, and that's a good thing. So, you could even go so far as to say they are by nature inefficient. And like the truly deeply human things sometimes are by nature inefficient. That's quite different than AI, which is by nature efficient and fast. So there's a potential conflict there. Okay, so the capabilities. AI, more than any other technology that existed. So technologies oftentimes take loads from us, physical burdens, intellectual tasks. But in the case of AI, this unburdening of tasks is just off the charts, right? AI can demonstrate creativity. It can demonstrate even empathy. It can demonstrate critical thinking in dramatic ways that might make us think, oh, we are so fortunate that we don't have the burden of being creative, of having to be empathetic, of having to think critically. Aren't we lucky? And no, you're the opposite of lucky. So, for example, let's talk about large language models, ChatGPT, for example, that make professors like me stay up at night because back in the olden days, before LLMs, and even if you go way back before the internet, right? So a professor could ask a student to write an essay, and a student, you could cheat on it. There's ways to cheat on it, even when you're using pencil and paper, but it tend to be pretty difficult. And even in the age of the internet before LLMs, you could get your essay, you can kind of copy and paste from the internet, but usually the product wasn't very good, and the professor can still be like, what is this? LLMs can write great essays. They can be creative and thoughtful and nuanced, and it removes the burden of having to organize your thinking, of having to think critically from you entirely. So again, the first thing you think is, well, it's my lucky day. I'm so glad to be living in this era where I don't have to do this work. The machine can do it for me. That's not helpful. Like professors, again, just I'm talking about my own job, right? We don't give essays because we're bored and lonely and we want to stay up at night reading essays. I don't give essay assignments because I want to have essays to read. I also don't give essays, and no good professors do, to create busy work for students and that they can just discharge with LLMs. We give essays because we think, okay, if people have to do the hard work of solving this problem, organizing their ideas, and expressing themselves, that's going to be good for their brain, right? That's going to be helpful for them. So an LLM takes away that opportunity that you had, right? Even if you wanted LLMs to take it away, right? Even if you're like, please, I write this essay for me, it's not good for you that it's able to do that. You're not lucky, you're the opposite of lucky. So what ethical value are we talking about here? So this is, we don't talk about virtue a lot, but this is one of the cases where virtue does show up. This is about human actualization, about humans becoming what they're meant to be. And the concern with the various AI tools is that we just are not going to have that opportunity anymore. So how can we avoid that fate where AI tools are actually taking away things that are good for us? Well, a couple points here. So first of all, we have to do the hard work of distinguishing between inhuman and human tasks. And by that distinction, I mean that there are a lot of things that we do that aren't particularly human, like they don't exercise my humanness. So I have to do them, but the reason I have to do them is because there's no one else and there's no machine to do it for me. So for example, I think I have to spend some time each day entering things into my calendar and like reorganizing things and saying, okay, it doesn't go here, or I spelled this wrong, and inviting people to this meeting. And if there's a technology that can just do that all for me, I think that's good. Now, I don't know. Someone can argue that, like, oh, it's actually good for you to have to think through. Okay, I would be happy for a technology that I can just say, hey, organize my schedule according to this, and that, priority, and then boom, and then I get my schedule, and then a little voice tells me like, hey, now it's time for your 9 o'clock meeting. I think that would be nice. I would rather focus on the meeting and not setting up the meeting, right? Okay, so that would be cool if technology could take that away, and it is. That's one of the things that's happening. But we also have to think about other activities, such as math, such as writing essays, such as deciding, who to vote for, based on what they're going to do with taxes or healthcare or something like that, that are actually good for us to have to think about. Another way to, maybe a different kind of way to think about this is in terms of how we use the technology. So again, going back to this LLM thing, I might have made it sound like I'm anti-ChatGPT. That is the farthest thing from the truth. I think ChatGPT is awesome. I love it. I don't use it every single day, but I use it most days, and just to bounce ideas off of. So you could think about using it as a crutch. So if you're you have to write an essay and you say, hey, ChatGPT, write this essay for me. That is using it as a crutch. That's saying, like there's important things that were supposed to be going in my brain, but I don't have time for that, so someone else, ChatGPT, please do this for me. But you can also think about it as a coming back to our word collaboration, as a true collaborator, right? So again, I think ChatGPT can be good because to get information from ChatGPT, you have to first think about what questions you want to ask it. You then have to think about how you're going to ask those questions, and a prompt engineer will tell you there's many, many different ways to ask the question to get different kinds of answers from ChatGPT. And also, you have to be able to evaluate the results. Some of the results it gives you are not helpful. They're true, but they're not relevant to the problem that you're addressing. Some of the results are actually false. ChatGPT loves to be helpful. In fact, it's so helpful sometimes it just hallucinates, right? So you have to be able to evaluate and saying, okay, is this result true? Is this the kind of result I wanted? And you can kind of collaborate with us in a meaningful way. So, thinking about how we use the technologies, it's not just the technologies themselves, good or bad, but it's how we use them also that is important. Okay, so that was a bit about deskilling, which, as I said, we can maybe call something much broader, like the problem of human actualization or something like that. So those are my thoughts on how collaboration with those systems could be good or bad.